So, my name is Johnathan Hawkins, and I'm a current student at Life High School Waxahachie, and I'm here today to present you the different PC components and the functionality that they have. All right. So, for right now, I'm going to start. At this moment, I'm going to start with the motherboard. Right. Okay. So basically, here's the CPU fan, and what the CPU fan does is it basically allows the CPU to cool itself. So I mean, it's like air cooling, yes, basically. So what it does is that it prevents the CPU from overheating or thermal throttling, because if that happens over time, then the CPU can actually destroy your processor over time. So you gotta be careful and be mindful of that. And then to move on is the RAM slots, and this stands for random access memory, and basically this is considered non-volatile system memory. And what it does is that the RAM, in a way, can communicate with the CPU. Now I don't know how. So basically, but yeah, it communicates with each other, and the CPU sends the information, I think, to the RAM to be processed through the system memory, and then it just interprets it on its own. But when your PC is off, like shut down all the way, the RAM doesn't have. That's why it's non-volatile, because it has nowhere to go. So it only can access itself once you turn it on and boot up. And then here's the built-in BIOS. So this is the onboard. It's built into it. So basically, if this messes up or malfunctions in any kind of way, you really can't really boot up into your system if it's shut down, basically. But the BIOS is just like a accessible like control center, I would say. Like, and basically you can even overclock your CPU through the BIOS, basically, or possibly I think the GPU. But they can vary, I think, time to time for the GPU. But then you also have the PCIe slot, and basically this is what is right here, and here. So yeah, so PCIe slot is for the graphics card, and what you can do is you just simply underneath the GPU you have a slot there too, basically, and once you connect this, it's a latch right here. So then when you put down this latch, that's step one to put it in. Then step two is to get the GPU and just slide it in. And then once you hear a click, normally it's latched on, basically. And then that's step two. Then the final step three and the final step is basically making sure that you get the power supply, right? Get the PSU. And then once you got the power supply unit in to the underneath the PC, you basically just plug in that PCIe cable. Yeah, so if it's already plugged into the power supply unit, the final step would be just to plug in the PCIe cable into the graphics card, and that provides power for it. So that's okay. And then this right here is the front power connectors. So basically this, so this allows, audio and power, then RGB. Okay, and that's the only ones I can really remember. But yeah, so I know it controls those, and then that's all I can know about that part. But then I can move on to the back plate. So basically, this is the I/O. So this is the I/O right here. All this is the I/O, and basically this is like your Ethernet. Like faster, download speeds and internet. We all want that, So we can use that. Then you have the HDMI, which is kind of standard on the I/O, but you don't see them on every motherboard. It just varies, I guess, by manufacturer. Then you have your DVI cable, which you don't see those a lot anymore, but they can be used, of course, for the different functions. And then you have that's USB. Yeah, USB 2. And basically they have, of course, 2 ports with them that you can select from each one. And yeah, yes. And that should about cover the motherboard. That should about cover it. And then you have the RAM sticks. So basically, what this is system memory for your PC, and what it does is, see, you see DDR4 right there, right? So basically, you can, if you buy RAM, like you want to build a computer like your own for any purposes, if you normally the main thing to look at, like if you don't know what you're doing, the main thing to look at is sometimes you can tell if it's DDR1, because it started out. Did it start DDR1? All right. So several years ago, it started out DDR1. So you can basically tell the speed that it contains by looking at the DDR, the number. And if it's like, I think this is 3200, or yeah, I think it's 3200 megahertz. But yeah, so you can basically not dictate, but you basically can kind of you basically be more decisive on it by looking at the DDR4, like the newest one. Then you got the DDR5. All right, and that's it for that part. Then you have the power supply unit. So basically, this is the modular power supply. I mean, this is a modular power supply unit, and basically what this means is that it's gonna have to. I mean, when you buy it in box, it's not gonna be, the cable's not gonna already be plugged in like it is now. It's gonna be separate if it was non-modular, but since this is modular, it has all the cables just hanging out. And it can be a little bit harder for cable management too sometimes when it's like this, but all right. And basically this function is basically provides power to the system. So if this fails or shuts down or malfunctions in any kind of way, that's pretty much it for your system. And right here, that's where you would plug in the power adapter, and it would turn. I mean, you would just turn on your PC. You also have, it's a 500 watt power supply unit, and basically, it's not gonna pull it. So even though it says 500 watts, doesn't mean it's gonna pull out. I mean, pull out that exact amount in your wall outlet every time you're using it. So it just depends on. It just varies from like what you're using it for, like what process you're going through with your system. But it can do that. That's what it's capable of going up to. But so this component is the hard drive, and basically its core function is to keep all your personal data information stored into it, and it's permanent storage. And what that means is that it retains it. I mean, it just retains your information, memory, all through your system memory, all of that into one hard drive, basically, to one little device. So this is very important when it comes to system storage, like one of the most important. And then you have the GPU, and this is the GPU part stands for, the abbreviation stands for graphical processing unit, and basically its core functionality is to see. So when you look at your monitor, and when you turn your PC on, and when it boots up, if you see anything on the screen, that's the GPU working, basically doing its thing, basically, right? So all right. So what you're gonna see with every GPU, I don't know for old ones, I know for sure now, like current time or present time, you see VRAM, and VRAM is just basically how fast the GPU is. So imagine your RAM, your system RAM, like system memory, basically compare that kind of to the GPU. That's in its own little way. And that's pretty much it. And not all of these come with back plates. Not all of them necessarily. It depends on who you buy it from. All right, so this is basically what I showed you on the beginning, but that's just the stock cooler, basically. So that's what came with the CPU in box. But you have the separate one, but basically the same functionality. I mean, it controls the cooling for the CPU, and you can adjust the temps, like the temperatures and stuff in BIOS. But basically, it serves its purpose by cooling the CPU, and it's basically creating preventative measures for any overheating, or any thermal throttling, or anything wrong with the thermal paste. And it's not standard, like not a thing that I'm recommending people do sometimes, but if you want to, though, every at least 2 or 3 years or so, maybe it's good to just check sometimes and replace the thermal paste, because that's important. Yeah, very important. And make sure no dust or anything is being filter through the fans or anything, because that can stop your fans. And once that stops, then basically CPUs can stop eventually too. So you don't want that to happen at all. And last but not least, you have the CPU. And so this is probably, if not the component, the main component of your PC. So right here you have the central processing unit, and this is basically the brain of the system. So if anything happens to this, even a little itsy bitsy, damage or negative impact done to it or whatever, that's a wrap for it. And then you have the pins right here. So the pins are very important. Very important, very important. And it's basically how it communicates with so when you put the CPU in socket on the motherboard, right, where it goes, once it's in that socket and it's powered on with the other components, it basically communicates to each other. that's communication all throughout. Then you have the transistors. Now, it's important to always remember too that it's okay to touch the pins sometimes, but if you have any, we have oils and stuff on the hands and all that at all times, or grease, you do not want to touch any of those. Because if it's been at a place or lost, maybe one part maybe fell off, any damage done to it, that's it. All right. Oh, and the case. So basically, you have the case, and what this is basically, of course, where you store all your PC components in, and the point of it also is to encase everything that needs to be put into place, like put in order by each other. So this is where the motherboard would go, and you have motherboards sometimes can vary by size too. So you have like micro ATX case, micro ATX motherboards. Then you have I forgot the other names honestly, but I do remember them. Just forgot them though at the same time. But so that can also vary by size. Then you have the case fans. So these are already here by default right here. But it just provides air, of course, air for your system. So to keep it, temperature and stuff down low or high, just depends. And then you have right here, you have these. So basically, you can I think it's either 2 or 4. But normally when you put your GPU in, once you have your motherboard in, you put your GPU in, and then, so you take one of these off, you put your GPU in, and once it's slotted in and the PCIe cable is connected to it, that's when you screw that back in. So your GPU is now your GPU is intact now with the system. Then you have where the hard drive cage. So right here is the hard drive cage, and basically that's of course where you store your hard drive in. And it can vary too by your case or your size of your case, but sometimes it can be kind of hard to put the hard drive in. But once it's slotted in and secured though, you get into your BIOS for the first time, you boot it up. As long as you see, it's a section. I forgot how it would go for this particular system, but it's a section you can go in. You can see if it detects it, and if your PC detects your hard drive and your graphics card, not graphics card, but processor, all this stuff, and system memory. Those 2 things, you should be good to go and boot up into your OS. And the power supply unit will go right here. You got the 4 screws. Yes. Oh yeah, those right there. And basically, you want to make sure those are secure too for your power supply unit, and make sure that the fan. You want to make sure it also got the fan right here is facing up front, like upright, because that way the air passes through the system well. And it can cool not cool, but basically, it just says it's important for the power supply unit to be facing up front with the fan up there. And that should be about it. That should wrap it up. And I'm not done my presentation.